Good evening, everybody. Pastor Jesse Bailey here. Welcome to The Bridge. We have an exciting conversation for you guys tonight. Our special guest tonight is Anna Nash, and we will be introducing her to you in just a moment. But before we get into our topic for tonight, just wanted to remind everybody about what The Bridge is. Remember, we have 3 principles that we go by here on The Bridge. Number 1, we keep it bold. That means that we are unashamed of the truth, and we speak the truth, and we seek the truth. And we are not afraid of any retaliation, and we're not afraid of letting our hearts and what we think and feel be put out there. So we're going to be bold tonight. We want to keep it balanced, though. We want to avoid those extremes that we fall into sometimes as human beings, and we want to make sure that that balance is weighted out by truth. So the way we discern whether something is balanced or not is whether it lines up with truth, the principles that govern the discovery of truth. So we keep it balanced. And then finally, we keep it biblical. We are Christians. We believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and we believe that the Bible is the Word of God and the final authority on all things on which it speaks. So we have a biblical worldview. That is our worldview, but if it is not your worldview, we 100% respect you because God has given you the ability to choose. So we're hoping that as we bring our worldviews together and purpose to find truth, that we will find that tonight. And tonight, we're going to be talking about a very hot topic, and it surrounds the COVID vaccine. So I am not a medical expert by any means, never claimed to be, but as the Lord would have it, I have a tremendous friend, Anna Nash, who's with us tonight.
Was not a medical expert, but an experienced emergency room nurse.
Yes, I was about to say that's more expertise than I have for sure. So Anna, thank you so much for joining us on The Bridge tonight. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm Anna. I am an ER nurse in an area hospital. Will not say which one. It's a pretty busy ER though. I have worked, I was a teacher initially as a lost post-college student. I had initially wanted to go to medical school, and unfortunately my performance in college during a couple of semesters prohibited that at the moment. So I graduated, I came out here, talked to my pastor's wife. She was like, they're dying for teachers in LA Unified. You go get your emergency credential and you'll be a teacher. And it was literally that easy. So I was a 4th and second grade teacher in Watts for 4 years, and then decided that I would go back to medical school, because I needed to prove it to myself I was smart and not a product of my poor choices. So in that time, I met my husband, and we were both kind of knuckleheads, but we were working at it. I decided that I was working as a volunteer at County Hospital, USC, and I would come in at, I think my shift was from like 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., and we're in the trauma area. And I saw the most amazing things. I would get off work and I would call Brandon and I'd be like, you'll never guess what I saw today. You'll never guess what I got to do. As a volunteer, things I should have never done. Yeah. But don't tell anyone that. But I realized there that I wanted to be a nurse. And at the time, I was like, these doctors, they don't know anything. The nurses are so smart, but I didn't know that they were like medical students and not doctors. So anyways, it was hands down the best choice ever for me to be a nurse. So I went to nursing school in Tucson, Arizona, went straight into the ER, and I've always been in the ER. We moved to Washington for a short period of time. I was in a pediatric ER, and then moved down here, and we've been at the same hospital I've been at for like 10 years now. So I guess I'm considered an expert nurse in what I do. So in emergency medicine, nursing is very different across the board. So I'm a homeschool mom with my mom's help, my own mother's help. I could never do it without
amazing.
her. She's incredible. I have 2 boys. They're 12 and almost 11, and they're really, really awesome kids.
They are. They're fantastic young men.
Yeah,
fantastic young men.
We were just discussing prior to the episode starting what a blessing and how much fun it is to raise children in the Lord and see the fruit of the things that you're doing, and just that feeling that God is just like, yes, like you're getting it right. So and part of that is thanks to you and your ministry, because Brandon and I, we've changed so much as people in the last 6 years that we've been going to, particularly sitting under your pastorship at Legacy. So
well, thank you.
It's awesome.
Hey, God brings people together for a reason, for seasons. And Anna, is not just a teacher, an educator. She is so well informed. In fact, we hadn't seen each other in a while.
In a year. The last time we saw each other was at Home Depot.
Yeah, that's right.
Same shopping center.
Yeah, it was weird. So I ran into Anna and we just started talking. And she was just, we started talking about the topic we're talking about tonight, vaccines, and just so much data and information. One of the things I really appreciate about you is that you're so fact-centric and not feeling-centric. That's one of the things I've always appreciated about you, and approach to whether she's teaching our kids in school. Our kids go to the same homeschool program together. And so I've always really appreciated about that, because it's such a balanced viewpoint. You're a person of the Word. You're a woman of the Word, and you're also a woman of science and medical experience, and there's such a good balance. And that being one of the things that we shoot for and aim for here on the Bridge, it was just so God that we ran into you. And then you said yes on short notice coming onto the Bridge. I had a whole other show planned, but as the Lord would have it, we get to have this conversation. So I appreciate your cerebral approach to these things, which is so needed, because when feelings and camps start getting built, then we can abandon truth. We can abandon fact for feeling. Whether those feelings turn out to pan out truth or not, it's still being led the wrong way. So that cerebral approach is very important. So I want to start the conversation off just by asking in general, because we're going to be talking about the COVID vaccine in particular.
Yes.
But there's a lot of talk about vaccines in general. So what is your feeling about vaccines in general? What's your approach to them?
So my feeling medically as a nurse, I think that vaccines in general are not harmful. I am fully vaccinated myself. My kids are fully vaccinated for what I consider to be necessary vaccines. We were discussing the HPV vaccine when we were in the parking lot, and discussing how I was not comfortable, not because I think that the vaccine is harmful. I haven't looked into it enough. There's so much information and misinformation, and it's very difficult to really dial down. One of the things that comes up when you're talking about vaccines, or any topic in general that's very controversial, why should I believe your source?
Right.
You don't want to believe my source, but why should I believe your source? Why do I believe where you're getting your information from?
Right.
So with the HPV vaccine, for instance, I said to my son's doctor, well, he doesn't know even what that is about.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to give him a vaccine. I can't discuss with him at this point in his life. Also, you're asking me to vaccinate and put something into my child that is perfectly preventable with appropriate behavior.
Yes. So
you're asking me to enable my son to have risky behavior.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I won't change my mind later, but for right now, that's how I feel.
Yeah.
I remember a time with Solomon. He had, that's my almost 11-year-old, and he was coming up on almost 2 years old, and he was supposed to have his second MMR vaccine. And he was exhibiting, he had always been a slow developer, wasn't hitting milestones. He had some oral motor issues. He didn't chew well, so he had to go to occupational therapy and speech therapy. And I was in this doctor's office, and I was like, maybe there's actually something wrong with him. and I'm going to give him this vaccine, and it's going to like really make him autistic. Like he had sensation issues and just weird things.
Yeah.
And God was like, Anna, if it's your destiny, if I have preordained you to have an autistic child, no vaccine or lack of vaccine is going to prevent my will from happening in your life. And I felt this immediate like, okay, God, okay. So if I do this and he's turns out to be autistic or have other learning disabilities or delays, then you ordained it because that's your will for my life and for his. And so thankfully, I mean, Solomon is definitely not right.
I thought you were going to say something else, so I was like,
no.
but...
I'm just teasing. He's, he does not exhibit any spectrum issues or anything like that. So, however, I don't want that comment about God ordaining it to come off as insincere to families who have children that have all kinds of developmental issues and delays and difficulties. Like that is not where my intention in saying that. That was just my own experience with being concerned about vaccines.
And I appreciate that, because even though again, the emotion behind it is one thing, but the reality of the statement is true. God is sovereign.
Yes.
And that's not to say that we are careless in making decisions, because que sera, sera, whatever will be, God's in control. But it does help in those moments when we have to make a decision and we don't know exactly what to do, to know that God is directing our steps. And I think that's the most important point that people need to understand. And again, when we have principles that we operate by, it removes the pressure from us. If we have a principle that I trust the Lord, and if I'm making this decision and he trusted me with this child, then I have to believe that God is going to bless me, so long as my heart is in the right place. My heart is to honor him. Now, if we're out there just being carefree and doing whatever and not listening for his voice, then yes, there's going to be some preventable things that can be invited into our life. But that statement is very powerful, that yes, God is sovereign. Now with that, there have been many people that I've talked to who give testimony to how their children have been injured. And you look at the videos. My daughter, she went through a very tough time when she got the very first one, and we decided, what, based on that response, we're not comfortable with putting more of that into her system. And it was just a decision that we made to stay away from that. Our first three got a few of the vaccines, but then as we started looking into it a little bit more, we're like, okay, that for us, that felt like a lot. There was just a lot of things that were being pumped into them. You look at the vaccination schedules today.
It's crazy.
Versus 30 years ago, you're like, whoa.
Yeah, I potentially, if I had a third child, I would have spaced out my vaccines a lot more. I had planned, when we were planning on trying to have another child, I had made the decision that I would rather go back more often to have more vaccines. And again, guys, you got to remember this. I'm a nurse, so I do believe in vaccines. However, I also believe in parents having the option to make that choice, to make the choice for their children. And we all have to, everything has risk.
Yes.
So you have to deal with the risk of that. There are many children across the world that die from vaccine preventable illnesses. And there's many children that are harmed and have lasting consequences from receiving vaccines. And that's a very difficult balance as a parent. And I believe that we would bridge that conversation so much better as a medical community if we were not shaming people for their decisions. I mean, I do work in that world where we have to ask, you have a newborn come into the ER with a fever, and let's say, or even a year-old child who's unvaccinated, and we ask everybody, are your child's vaccines up to date? It's a box I have to check. I just gotta click yes or no when I'm triaging, and the parents always, it's so awkward because they don't feel comfortable telling me no, they're not vaccinated. But then the comments that will come back sometimes from doctors are, well, because your child is unvaccinated, we have to do all of these tests and these terrible, mean things to them. We have to do this lumbar puncture. We have to do all of these things because we don't know if they could have a serious bacterial or viral illness due to, your deficiency as a parent, in not following medical advice. I'm telling you, this is not what I would say or what I think. This is how it comes across. And that's wildly inappropriate to do to parents who, for the most part, parents just want what's best for their kid, and they're doing their best to make decisions based on how they feel and what evidence they feel they have, and what their God or their religion sometimes, other than Christianity, tells them they can and can't do for their children. We've made really big strides in taking care of Jehovah's Witness patients and not making them, if you're anemic or you are hemorrhaging blood and you can't receive blood products, we now have a lot more compassion in the way that we talk to these families and people, and saying, okay, well, we understand that in your religion, you won't go to heaven if you that's essentially, not an expert, that's the issue with Jehovah's Witness, is that the spirit is in the blood, and therefore if I accept blood from someone else other than me, even if it's my dad or my husband, then I will not be able to go to heaven. So if we can have compassion for that, and allow people to make those decisions and take those risks, we should be able to do that as well for parents that choose not to vaccinate.
Absolutely. And I think one of the important things to address is that there is no real right or wrong answer to this. As human beings, we like the idea of there being definites. We want a definite answer to this, because in large part, let me just be real, it's for lazy reasons. If I don't have to think about it, then it makes it easier to make the decision. Vaccines are bad, or vaccines are good, and if you don't get them, then you are bad. So we move to these extreme positions, and we don't consider the fact that God may be speaking to us. When we were talking in the parking lot, Anna said something that I just began to laugh at. She said, if the Bible said that thou shalt not vaccinate, then we're good. But the reality is, it doesn't say thou shalt not vaccinate. It does not say thou shalt be vaccinated or else. So it's left to us to discern and have wisdom on the decisions that we make. I personally, I'm not against the idea of vaccines. You look at what they did for polio.
Yeah, one of the arguments actually that I read, I'm so sorry.
No.
Regarding this concern over vaccinations, that's really mounted quite greatly in the last 20 years, I'd say. Polio, for instance, people like my parents' age, my mom's age, grew up. Everyone knew a kid on their street that had been left with some sort of deficit from polio. So the fear of the disease at that time was much greater than the fear of any vaccination. And now we have really eradicated many of these childhood diseases through vaccination. Now we don't have that to fear. So now we've potentially are now fearing vaccine because we don't have the fear of fearing the disease. That's just one thing that I thought was actually pretty profound when I read it. I was like, oh, that's... And I'm not saying that if you choose not to vaccinate, you're in fear. Not saying that. But a lot of people are.
And I think one of the reasons why, like me, I'm a person of science. I love science. I love truth. I love fact. I'm not afraid of it. I don't feel that it It is contrary to the scripture, and most of the time I think it validates it. I believe that science and medical science in particular is a gift from God.
Absolutely.
It's amazing what medical science can do. You can take one person's heart and put it into another person. I mean, that is the wildest thing. You have guys talking about head transplants now. I don't know.
Face transplants.
I'm like, it is absolutely amazing what mankind can do because God has allowed us to discover that. And in that amazement comes part of the concern.
Yes.
Because when we have people that can do such amazing things, we've seen throughout human history that people have taken things that are good and used them for evil.
Just because we can, should we?
Should we?
That's
and
my
just
question.
because we can, sometimes we push the envelope. Let's
Absolutely.
apply this to the church. Let's apply this to the Bible.
Absolutely.
The Bible is pure. The Bible, the Word of God says that in Proverbs that the Word of God is pure. So how is it that we can take something that is pure and then use it to manipulate and control people? It's because man has gotten involved. So I'm not opposed to medical science. I'm not opposed to the idea of vaccines. But when you mix in mankind's proclivity for self-destruction and evil, then you start looking at some things and look, you can call me a conspiracy theorist or whatever. I'm more of a conspiracy realist. I know that biblically speaking that there is evil in the world and that evil uses any and every opportunity to cause harm to people. And I'm not being an alarmist here, but when you start to see what we are capable of, and you juxtapose, did I say that right? Juxtapose that. Juxtapose, thank you. With the truth of the Word of God, then you can start to see why people would be concerned. When you start looking at certain stats, like the rise in autism. Now, there's so many variables with so many different studies, like we were talking about.
Yes.
You can't put any one thing to it, but there are some interesting correlations. So when you look at autism, that has gone from 1 in 250,000 cases, I think that was back in the 80s, to now we're in 1 in 250, and that was a few years ago. So it's probably increased, particularly around young men. So when you see the increase in vaccination schedules and the increase in all this, and then you see the increase in autism, and they run at a relatively similar rate, just in terms of time span, according to many of the studies, it does make you think, okay, is there a correlation? This seems really interesting. So there's no hardcore evidence. There was a movie that came out several years ago called Vaxxed. Did you ever get an opportunity to see that movie?
Oh, I think I might have seen some of it on YouTube. I can't guarantee.
But it was compelling to watch. There wasn't so much scientific data in it. It was more of a testimonial and then whistleblower. That was inside the CDC that was giving information saying that they did see that there was evidence for that. So you see things like that, and they could be completely off the rocker. But when you see certain things like that, and then we talk about medical science and all the good that they're doing, but then you see those elements, the same doctors that are healing us and coming up with these amazing things, they're also the same minds that are telling and teaching our children that we're evolving.
Very true.
That you came from slime.
Yeah, very true.
And so when I see that this is your basis for that,
point.
And it's contrary to the Word of God, it puts a check in me like, okay, if you grab hold of this theory of evolution, natural selection, survival of the fittest, and you take that principle and apply it across the board, that has some scary end results. If you look at population, overpopulation, and the concern that's surrounding that, and you have guys like Bill Gates who can't keep a virus out of a computer, but now wants to keep that out of our body. And
I heard he was also behind Common Core educational policy, and I was like, why is Bill Gates?
Yes, it's just when you again mesh biblical prophecy with what we have now, then you can see why people would be concerned about a global, worldwide movement to ensure everybody gets this vaccine in their system.
Yes.
So again, no data to back it up, but it's just interesting. And that's why that's my level of concern. I think medical science is amazing. I actually wanted to be a doctor, but I didn't have the patience. um, so we can see where that's coming from. So based on your experience, you're someone who's around this all the time.
Yes.
So what kind of eases your mind? And you're a woman of the word. You know these things. So what kind of eases your mind? Some of the things that you've seen that help you make that type of decision for you and your family.
So first off, I'll say my perspective, again, in medical decision making always goes back to that situation I had with Solomon.
Yeah.
Also, being an ER nurse, I see people die all the time.
Yeah.
I see children die. I've held children of parents as a child died in my arms, and the parent, just couldn't hold them, or they're emotional. Obviously they can't. I just recently experienced my husband's stepmother dying, and was able to share the gospel with her. It was beautiful. But I've also had experiences as a nurse where I was convinced I did something wrong, or I didn't do something right. And God has really shown me that He is the author,
yes,
and the finisher.
Amen.
There is nothing that I can do. There's no prayer that I can pray enough.
Yeah.
In the room with someone who's dying or dead. There's no other one thing I could have done that's going to, this is all outside of straight negligence.
Yeah.
That's going to change the day that God has determined that person is,
Amen.
going one of two places.
That's such a good point.
So, as far as the COVID vaccine is concerned, I have chosen at this point not to receive it myself. I have asked my parents not to get it. One of the reasons is my father has something called Guillain-Barré syndrome. And when you have Guillain-Barré, it's an autoimmune disorder where your immune system is over active. And it was a long story. That's another episode. But we've always been told he's not supposed to receive vaccines. He can't get particularly like the flu shot because it could bring it back. So I was like, okay, well, obviously my dad's not going to get it. My best friend had Guillain-Barré. It's crazy. They both got it when they were living in my house. Everybody was like, maybe you need to burn sage. I was like, well, no, I'll pray. So obviously I've, told her, you can't make this decision. There's not enough data to decide whether or not, I've had doctors say there's been no cases of Guillain-Barré that we've seen in the post-vaccination period. I said, well, how many of the people though in the studies had Guillain-Barré in the past? I'm not concerned about him getting it from the vaccine. I'm concerned about it reoccurring. He's had it before.
Right.
And we had been told at that time by his neurologist that potentially it was having the flu shot. He got the flu shot many months prior, and the medical community, we really don't consider vaccine reactions to be related to vaccines unless they're within, I think, 3 weeks of the post-vaccination period. However, you are telling me that this is a very robust flu shot that year, I guess, and they saw a lot of Guillain-Barré cases in that particular year.
Wow.
That doesn't necessarily mean that everyone had their flu shot. I don't know what the specifics are, but it's a correlation. One big thing in statistics, particularly always in medical statistics, is correlation does not mean causation.
Right.
So I have another family member whom I love dearly, who we have not seen in like 9 months. She's over 65. She's scared to death to get COVID. And she said, what if I get cancer in 10 years from this? I said, well, I don't think that's going to happen, but we're talking on the phone right now and you're a little distracted in the car. And what if you get in a car accident and you die and we haven't seen you in a year?
Yeah. And
we live in the same city. Like, wow. If getting the vaccine is going to make you feel more comfortable to live your life,
yeah.
And then I personally am like, okay, then go get it. You're 67 years old. You've lived a good life. Like, if something does happen, I mean, I don't know what to say, because any number of horrible, terrible tragedies could happen between now and whenever if the vaccine has some negative side effect, but between that happening and we haven't even hugged you.
Yeah.
So that's how I have personally advised a few people that I love. Why are my reasons for not getting the COVID vaccine? I'm 42. I'm, for the most part, a vegan. Mm-hmm. I exercise every single day. I exercise on my lunch break at work because I don't like to sit still.
Feeling guilty.
I am not. I have taken care. Brandon and I were trying to tally how many COVID patients I've personally cared for since this time last year.
Yeah.
And it's somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500.
Wow.
And I was trying to say, like, some days maybe I had 2, other days I saw 20, right? I'm in triage, so I'm triaging 30 COVID patients at least in a 12-hour shift. I've worked in the COVID ICU with patients that were aerosolized, so ventilated, and things that were breaking the COVID particles potentially up into smaller pieces, so it's easier to get into you if you're wearing a paper mask. For the majority of the COVID period, they were telling us just wear a paper mask, so we're wearing paper mask. I'm all up in these people's faces. I'm swabbing their noses, and I didn't get it. I don't have antibodies for it. I didn't have an asymptomatic infection, so I said, well, we were pretty tight in our personal life because my parents live with us, and we weren't willing. My dad has a lot of comorbidities, so we weren't willing to tell them that they had to go home to their house in Washington and not be with us.
Yeah.
So I was like, I haven't gotten it so far.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm comfortable wearing a mask. It doesn't interfere with my personal life a ton. I mean, a little bit, but and the biggest thing that I've been concerned about is the push. So whether that's nefarious or not,
the push to get the vaccine,
push to get it, does that mean that it's evil and harmful? I am not willing to try to make that distinction right now, but I know that I listen to so many doctors that I work with, so many doctors that I follow online, vaccine people that worked on, in particular, one doctor who worked on the RSV vaccine that was a really big, dangerous vaccine, and they quit even trying to create one after they had issues with that particular vaccine. And they all said the same thing up until the week after the election, which was interesting. Doesn't matter who you voted for.
Just interesting.
Interesting. That it was, there's no way we could do this safely. There's no way we could, even when they were discussing that what types of vaccines they were working on, no one ever brought up the fact that, like, well, we've been researching this type of technology for a really long time. And I saw this switch. I was like, that is so weird.
Yeah, that's, you hear everyone saying, there's no way we can do it. There's not enough time. And we were hearing that from many different sources. There's not enough time. There's no way it can be
There's no way in under 2 years it would be safe. There's no way.
And then now, all of a sudden, we're cranking this stuff out by the millions, giving it to everybody. Really, this is an experiment. This is a large, probably the largest scale experiment.
And they wanted to experiment on healthcare workers.
Healthcare workers and Black people, according to Bill and Melinda Gates.
Yes.
We can go into that. Watch Past Bridges.
So I saw people, all my coworkers posting on Facebook. They would have these step and repeats at these vaccination events. You know, the sign with like the such and such health and Pfizer, and has all the brands on the back. Like if you're at like a red carpet,
Right.
and you're like, look at me, I believe in science, I'm saving the world, I'm doing this because I love you. And I was like, that's really strange. I wouldn't think that, like, that's pretty private
Yeah.
decision, like, to your medical, your healthcare and what you're
Yeah.
choosing to do with your body. And I thought and then you start seeing on Facebook, whatever, they have like those little frames that can go around your picture, right? People
Yeah.
are like changing their profile, and it's like the same frame kind of
Yeah.
thing, like, I believe in science. I'm thinking, did Facebook put out this like blanket frame you could put your picture in?
Right.
I'm not very tech savvy, so I wouldn't know. But then I started talking to a coworker. We started finding that there was very well, now I've discovered there's more of us than I thought initially who chose not to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
I also had a major issue with trying to vaccinate someone who's not in a high risk group. Like, why
Yeah.
are you not vaccinating if this is such a miracle,
Right.
why aren't we vaccinating every single person in a nursing home?
Yes.
I should not be offered this vaccine when I am at a facility in a wonderful hospital who had all of the PPE I could ever need.
Yeah.
And everyone who's over 65 should be getting this then. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to get it till everyone who's vulnerable is going to gets
Right.
it. And I was met with a lot of anger from mostly from physicians assistants that I work with. I was told that I was stupid, which doesn't bother me. Told that I was reckless. I was like, I've been wearing a mask in public for almost a year now,
Yeah.
to protect my parents. My children have been wearing masks at homeschool group.
Yeah.
They have been wearing masks running hill sprints. They wear their masks. They just played 6 games at a 2-hand touch football tournament this weekend, wearing masks the whole time. You're telling me I'm reckless?
Right.
I'm not the one that went vacationing in Mexico and came out with COVID.
Right.
Like some of my coworkers. I'm not to be judgmental, but how dare you tell me I'm reckless?
Right.
So
But that's that bullying.
it was,
And see, that's part of the culture.
weird.
Now we got to be honest. It goes both ways, because
Yes.
you show up to a place and you don't have a mask on and people will bully you. But you go to some places and you have a mask on and people will do the same. They'll look at you like, "Oh, you have no faith," or anything like that.
Yeah, very much
And that's
so.
something that we've tried to be very balanced on, because the reality is COVID is a sickness and it does impact people, and people have died. There's no denying anything
Yes.
about the sickness. I may disagree with how it was handled, but with something like this, what we've never dealt with before, you want to be cautious at first. But then once some of the data starts coming in, you have a little bit more information to make decisions. But the bottom line is that we need to protect the most vulnerable. That's always been the position that I take, is let's allow those who are healthy to make good decisions, and then protect the most vulnerable. You and her husband Brandon, they're like all-star athletes. It's ridiculous. They're in great shape, and you guys are not high risk by any stretch of the imagination. Yet you need to protect your parents who are living at your house, particularly your father, who's in a place where this could really be damaging to him. So that makes
Statistics-wise,
sense.
he would die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. But when there's this bullying and there's this pressure to do these things, and here's the problem that I have. There's a tremendous amount of inconsistency during this. And you cannot just attribute it to the fact that, we didn't know much about this. For example, Dr. Fauci, when everything first came out, first thing he says, you don't need to wear a mask. Masks don't do anything. Essentially, that's what he said. And then he came out and said, no, do wear a mask. Then it was, no, the N95 mask works. And then it was, no, wear any mask. And then wear a double mask. And so there's just been this inconsistency in the data. And we're not talking about a vaccine here. We're talking about masks. We're talking about masks that they have done studies on. My sister-in-law, one of her good friends, that's all he does is study the effectiveness of masks. So it's not like we don't have data. We have clinical trials from going back decades and to 2012, 2015, outside of the COVID event. So we see what's going on with masks. But it's this I'm not sure about the vaccine. No, now you have to take it.
Yeah.
And then we bully you.
Yeah. And we're
That
going to
just
get
doesn't-
mad that you don't listen to us, which, like, okay, so masks, yeah, I mean, I personally believe masks are super effective. I've been wearing one the whole time. I didn't get it. Most all my coworkers have gotten COVID. I shouldn't say most, I guess. A lot of my coworkers have gotten COVID, mostly from outside in the community, though they wouldn't admit that. I don't think any are watching right now, but
just in case you are,
but
we
just in
love
case
you.
you are, I love you. But, so I personally, I think a lot of this comes with like my general personality is, I don't care what anybody else says, I'm going to just decide for myself on most things. But I don't understand. I think that the medical community is operating out of fear. Not I think, I know. I was explaining this to Sydney, if you're out there, Sydney Taylor. One time, she and JT were asking, like, why is this, like, what's going on? This was kind of the beginning. And I said, you've got to understand medical science for the last, let's say, 60 years has only gone up and up and up and up in terms of what we can do, what we know, how we can save people, how we can help with pain, like how can we cure cancer? Like we're curing people of things. People are living good lives through like terrible chronic illnesses because of medical advances.
Yes.
So none of us were, at least no one I work with was alive during the Spanish flu. So none of anyone, and I can only speak for the community that I work with, none of anyone had ever experienced anything like this before.
Yeah.
And so if anyone knows doctors, they are not wrong. Like admitting that you're wrong is very, very difficult. We were all just trying our best, sometimes on a minute by minute basis, to do what we thought was best. So you get this piece and you're grasping for anything because it's devastating. It's horrible. It was horrible. It was literal hell. Well, no, probably not as bad as hell. I'm sure not as bad as hell, but it was very hell-ish. We had family members. Like I remember I had one patient who, I had to call his family and tell him he'd had a stroke, likely due to COVID, because you become hypercoagulable. And the family member was like, he's telling me this terrible story. That it was 4th of July weekend. They live in Vegas. They have grandma and grandpa live here, and a brother lives here. So the sister-in-law was like, no, we should not go to Las Vegas for July 4th. And then the brother that lived there was like, yes, we should. Like, we've all been safe. We've done let's get together. We haven't seen you guys. And they all get together out there. Grandpa gets COVID and has a massive stroke. And they were like, well, now we should all get tested. And I said, oh, I don't think you want to do that. I don't think you want to know who gave it to Grandpa. Yeah. Like I said, it's really not that important. If you guys aren't having symptoms, I don't think you want that information. Yeah. So you have grandchildren all through the holidays who were, doing their thing, and grandma and grandpa, and we've had multiple patients at our facility. Grandma and grandpa both passed. Mom and dad both passed. So when you're dealing with something like that, where normally, especially in the ER, we can save just about everybody. We're the wild, wild west of the nurses and medical staff. We're like, no, my finger is on that artery. It is not still bleeding. Right. Right? Like, wow. No. He was alive when he left here. I don't know what happened in the elevator on the way up. Yeah. So for us, we can fix like anything, even if it's temporary, and we couldn't fix a darn thing about this. And so I can't speak for Dr. Fauci or whatever was going on with all those people, but for my community of healthcare professionals, We were just taking whatever was coming down the pipeline, day to day, switching, choosing, maybe this is right, maybe that's right.
Right.
And it was all from the heart of just wanting to stop this from happening, just wanting to find something that would be effective. Like, the ventilator is our like last ditch effort. Like, well, shoot, if they're brain dead, put them on the ventilator. At least it'll keep them alive until, you know, and when they leave the ER, they're still alive. There's always a chance, and we could not do that. And so I think a lot of people that don't work, even if you're in the medical community, but you don't work in maybe in the emergency department or in the ICU where you were really experiencing this, just can be a little judgmental about the mixed information. However, when you have people coming on claiming to be experts, they're giving you constantly different information all the time. You're like, what kind of an expert are you?
Right.
I'm not going to listen to anything you say.
Right. And so with that, it kind of gives us a little bit of, you know, hesitation.
Yes.
When, you know, it's one thing when it's a mask and we actually have hard data about masks and what they do and what they don't do. But now we're talking about injecting something into your body.
Yeah.
We've had very little time to develop, zero time to test, and now we're going to be injecting this. I mean, it's a little bit nerve-wracking. So when it comes to vaccines, I'm going to talk about the COVID vaccine specifically. We've heard a lot about how this is a vaccine, but then we hear, well, actually, it's not a vaccine. By definition, it is still a vaccine.
Yes.
So it is a vaccine, but it does function differently. So what's different about the COVID vaccine from other vaccines, like a regular flu shot or something like that?
So typically what, like the flu shot and other vaccines, they will take the actual virus itself that they're trying to vaccinate against. They will inactivate it or kill it, typically using heat, sometimes using formaldehyde. So don't forget about formaldehyde. It's literally in your body right now. Formaldehyde is.
Okay.
Just at a really low concentration.
Right.
So, and then they inject you with it and your body builds antibodies. Your body still recognizes it as a virus. It's dead, so it can't infect you. Like with the flu shot, they stopped doing the nasal spray. The nasal spray was actually a live virus.
Oh, wow.
So I know it was interesting, and they stopped doing that when I think my boys were like 4 or 5 maybe. We didn't get that option anymore. So your body says, whoa, what is this thing? It goes through its whole immune response. It creates antibodies against that particular virus. And then when your body encounters that virus in the wild, your body goes, oh, I know what this is. I have these antibodies already made. I know how to respond to this. And it goes and it kills it. And sometimes you might experience minor symptoms versus experiencing versus not getting it at all. Typically, like the flu shot, when they say, well, it's only such and such % effective, what that usually means is that you likely will not actually get the flu. It'll take care of all of it, or potentially you'll get just a very small, short couple of days of feeling ill versus like the 7 to 14 days of being really under the weather with influenza.
Yeah.
So they influenza, everybody knows you're supposed to get one every year. Some of that has to do with mutation of the flu virus is really wily, and it just constantly mutates and changes enough that your body won't recognize it. There's also different influenza subtypes that flow throughout the world depending on what hemisphere you're in. And the vaccine makers have like I think they have a conference once a year.
Right.
They like go over data. They say, well, Australia had their flu season before us, and so these were the major subtypes. And they have to pick and choose and decide which sorry, I talk with my hands a lot. I'm noticing.
Hey, no, that's quite all right.
Okay,
I'll
which
start
one?
doing the same thing.
Which one to include in the vaccine.
Right.
They had some really poor outcomes with a quadrivalent, which is like 4 subtypes in one in Italy, like some period of time ago, more than a decade ago. Typically they don't do that. It's usually 2 to 3 subtypes of the flu. So the difference with coronavirus is that it is, okay, so you have DNA. Everything has DNA. Everything alive has DNA. DNA is the strangest molecule that is comprised of only 4 things. So I have to refer to my notes to make sure that I don't get any words wrong. But we just made some in our homeschool class. We made these strands of DNA. So you have these nucleotides. They're compounds. There's only 4 of them. There's adenosine. I think there's A, T, G, C. So like A and T only pair and G and C only pair. So you have one strand of DNA that's got A, T, G, C all down it like 1 billion times. And then your other strand pairs with that 1 billion times. And that codes for, hey, body make this. Hey, do that. It codes for proteins. Those proteins come together and they do everything in your body. So in order for that to happen, DNA is inside the nucleus. Anything inside the nucleus can't really get out. So messenger RNA is made. That's when one of the big things. They're injecting me with messenger RNA. Well, it's already in you. It's in every cell. The only way for your DNA to get expressed into something in your body is for messenger RNA to come along and read that DNA strand, and it makes like a copy. So I liken it to going to a restaurant and you give your order to the waiter. Now the waiter doesn't write down like, I would like a gluten-free bun. The waiter writes down like, HAM for hamburger, GF, they might not even put bun down. It's just supposed to know what GF means. So that's what messenger RNA does. It has things called exons and things called introns. I think the introns are the things that get left out, the stuff that is potentially not necessary to be relayed. And the exons are what's kept in. So then the messenger RNA exits the nucleus, does not go back inside. It does not get into the nucleus. I'm not saying if you believe that it's going to alter your DNA, trust me, I'm not telling you that you're incorrect. I'm just telling you from someone who has studied a lot of science multiple times in my life, I don't see how that's possible. So the messenger RNA takes it out to the ribosome. The ribosome reads the messenger RNA and goes, oh, okay, I can make that. So what the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine have is they have created a synthetic messenger RNA that codes for, let's say if a waiter had a pre-written little thing for everyone that came in and wanted a gluten-free hamburger. And instead of writing it down, he'd just be like, check the box and give it to the cook.
Okay.
So the messenger RNA codes for a portion of the spike protein on the outside of the coronavirus. The spike protein is the little, why they call it corona, like a crown, and has spikes all over it. That's how it actually attaches to your cells, particularly in your lungs. And that's how it makes its way inside. If it didn't have spike proteins, it theoretically wouldn't be able to get into your lungs. Okay. So we give this messenger RNA the codes for the spike protein. We have to wrap it in like sugars and fatty particles because messenger RNA degrades really fast. When it's in your body, it's not in your body for very long when it's trying to tell your body to make proteins because it goes away really fast. So they wrap it in this little fatty layer so it can last longer and it can get into your cell, and it doesn't go into your nucleus from what I've read and how I believe science works, chemistry and anatomy works. And the ribosome will read it and tell your body to make the spike protein. So it's not an injection that's giving you antibodies. It's an injection telling your body to make this particular spike protein. Then your body has the immune response, creates antibodies so that when it encounters the spike protein of the actual coronavirus, it will have made antibodies. So it's like a 2-in-1 thing. It's your body's having to make the spike protein and make antibodies against the spike protein. So that's Moderna and Pfizer, and they have different technologies that I don't understand because I'm not that smart. I mean, I guess I could maybe figure it out if I studied it for a really long time, but and then they have some different ingredients. One of the allergic reaction issues that I really couldn't substantiate any evidence, not evidence of, but any data on. I think Moderna uses some molecule that has some polyethylene glycol. They thought people might have been allergic to that and having allergic reactions to the shot. I don't know. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a semi more typical vaccine. It actually has an adenovirus vector, and adenovirus is like a common cold type virus that they kill that. They attach the spike protein to it in some miraculous way that I also don't understand, and then they inject you with that. So it's this viral vector that is bringing the spike protein in, and your body makes antibodies against it, and then hopefully it will have the same circulating antibodies when it encounters COVID. It will also doesn't necessarily kill COVID, but it attacks and smothers the spike protein. So if COVID gets in your system, but it can't bind to your cells,
right,
it can't get in and hijack. What viruses do is they essentially hijack your own cells and convince your body to start making more of the virus. So viruses can't live. People are like, well, where's the flu? Well, there's no hosts. Everybody's sick with COVID. And the flu virus has to have a host with machinery available so that it can replicate itself. So it's not there because most people are infected with COVID.
So if you have COVID, you can't have the flu at the same time.
I don't think we had a single viral co-infection in our hospital since the start of COVID. That was one of the big things was if we tested you and you had influenza, we were pretty sure you didn't have COVID because it's really difficult for the body unless you're like immune suppressed or something like that for the body to be infected with two types of viruses because of the way that the viruses work.
They're competing with each other.
They're competing
so one's going to win
another.
out.
Yes.
Okay. See, I didn't understand that. That makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. So what you're saying is the Moderna and the Pfizer, they don't actually go after the virus itself.
No.
They go after the spike protein.
Yes. All of the vaccines are concentrating on the spike protein only, not necessarily making antibodies to the entire virus.
Is there any reason why they aren't going with that approach? What makes COVID different that they wouldn't do that? Perhaps it's just easier. Again, I would imagine that it would be easier to go after the spike protein than the whole thing because, again, this is really quick.
Yes, and I'm not entirely certain. However, I think it does have to do with some data regarding the spike protein and its affinity for what are called ACE receptor cells in the lungs. That was one of the things initially we were talking about, that potentially these ACE receptors were expressed in a greater abundance in African American and Hispanics, particularly males. And was that why they were hit hardest with COVID? It seemed because they do know from studying coronaviruses, there's tons of coronaviruses out there, that they do know that this spike protein has an affinity for these ACE cells. So potentially it seemed like, I wish I knew a good answer for that, but I don't. But I would assume that that's because that's how it binds and docks. That's that's the key into the lock.
So that's the easiest way to knock this thing out.
It seemed. Maybe.
So if it goes after the spike protein, I want to cover two things real quick. So if it goes after the spike protein, so it doesn't actually destroy the virus, it destroys the spike proteins on it.
Yeah.
So it takes the claws off, so to speak, so it can't attach. So what happens to that virus once it's in the body and it doesn't have the spike proteins anymore?
It would theoretically, like all other viruses, die. Like when I have a super weirdly strong immune system. I haven't even had a cold in like Well, at least since we moved to LA, so 10 years.
Must be nice.
I know.
Go vegan and work out every day. But I actually want to talk about that.
Okay.
I actually want to talk about
Yes.
that. But getting back to the spike protein.
So yeah, so like I don't know, viruses. I am around people all the time. I've never worn a mask before at work, so I'm getting coughed on by little kids and spewed on by old people, and I never get sick. So viruses, you might inhale them or get them, and they get in there, and then the immune system does its thing, and then they can't replicate, so they die. They do have like they're not immortal, you know. So they do have some sort of length of time that they can. The particle itself can live before it dies off if it's not replicating.
So if you get this virus in you, depending on how many viruses make it into your body, and they're sitting there, they're not replicating. So and their spike protein is destroyed. How contagious is that person then?
They have no idea. Well, they like to say that they know. I haven't read any data that has any sort of definitive answer to that, which was yet another one of the reasons why I chose. I don't want the vaccine right now, and I don't know if that will change or if my decision will not change. Which we'll talk about that too, because there's a part of that that's difficult. That if am I still able to transmit it though? You know, like. I still have to I'm going to get the vaccine, but I still have to wear the mask.
You still have to social distance.
You still have to do all of these things because we don't know if you can still give it to other people. The vaccines, for the big thing about all three of the vaccines is that they basically protect 100% against hospitalization and 100% against death. They say that's like I know the last thing I read with Johnson & Johnson. So there's all these other stats given about like symptomatic, how many people had symptomatic illness, how many people had asymptomatic. Typically that all kind of gets pushed out of the way because it's a little hard to understand like effectiveness versus efficacy, and then how that applies to the community. But it's that in the groups, people who received the vaccines, no one went to the hospital and no one died in their study groups of COVID.
Okay.
So that is encouraging for people that have comorbidities and people that are likely would suffer and have poor outcomes. However, again, you know, when we were talking, I said, you know, I'm not saying that it's dangerous. However, I'm just putting my foot down to the fact that you want me to be a guinea pig.
Yeah.
That you're telling me that as a healthcare worker, I was told this by one particular provider, it was my duty as a healthcare worker to show the public that it was safe. I was like, no, that's weird.
Yeah.
If it's so safe, then people will want to get it and then time will tell. Well, we don't have time.
Yeah.
Well, I just don't I don't think that that's correct. That doesn't make me feel safe and confident.
Right.
The other thing was, given that this is coming out, you know, we can speculate who started it, what was behind it. You could speculate all of those things. However, given the current environment of everything going on, I was not comfortable just getting in line because the government said so. Because the government says that it's good for me, and I do all the things that the government says, and you know, because they said it's safe, so I'm gonna get in line. I feel like that is that it's conditioning us to just say yes when the government says so, because we have your best interests at heart and we know what's best for you, and so you should do what we say. I was uncomfortable with that as well.
Especially, and I understand that there are moments. I mean, if we were dealing with Ebola and something that was, you know, if you get this, you're going to die.
Yeah, Ebola, not good.
That's a guarantee. So we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with something that has a more than 99.9% recovery rate. In the grand scheme of things, when you put that on a global scale with 8 billion people, then yes, that's still a lot of people, and we have to acknowledge that. But at the same time, all these numbers are skewed. That's the thing about this. It's hard to get really good, solid numbers.
And you're not getting good data from a finalwarning.com either.
Yeah.
Like these, it goes
Yeah.
back to, again, like, well, why are your sources so credible and mine
Right.
aren't? Like, I'm going to the CDC, but you're telling me that there's a whistleblower at the CDC, but everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame.
Right.
People do terrible things all the time. A
Right.
lot of, like, there's so many, you can't, that's yet another reason why I kind of dug my heels in, because I was like, I can't trust anybody but my God right now. If my
Amen.
God tells me to get this, if I pray about it,
Yeah.
and I have peace and I feel like the Lord is directing me to do this,
Yeah.
then I will. And
Yeah.
that's what Jesse and I were discussing also, which is, well, what would you do if you were forced to get it at work? Well, my job is not a job to me. It's not
Yeah.
a career. It's not some place that I go to make a ton of money. It's a ministry to me. It's where I feel like I really do God's work. I glorify God at my job. Like,
Yeah.
I pray with people. I pray for people. I give advice. I talk. It's my ministry. That's where God wants me to be. That's why I don't quit working.
Yeah.
So will I likened it to the furnace. Will I step into the furnace and trust God to keep me through that, given
Yeah.
that is my call?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably it. Things could change from day to day. But currently, if I walked in tomorrow and they told me I had to get it, I probably would.
Yeah.
If they told me I had to get it tomorrow, like at 8:30, like I had to go right down to the I'd
Right.
probably be like, hold up, I have some
Right.
PTO. I'm going to need to take some vacation and pray on this.
Yeah.
But that's also, there is definitely a level of, not even a level, that's the only thing in every decision that we make, no matter whether it's for our health or our finances or what socks I'm going to put on today. Like, I have to just constantly keep in mind that I am glorifying God every day. That is my purpose on this earth, is to glorify the Lord.
Amen.
And if I'm not in position with what God wants me to do, vaccine or not, I'm not useful to him. And that's a scary place to be.
Yeah.
So,
And I love that perspective that you brought too, because usually when you hear, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego going into the fire, it's well, I'm not going to bow down. And some people would say, oh, well, getting the vaccine because the government said so is the bowing down, and the going into the fire is what happens if you don't do that. But I liked your perspective. I never thought of it that way, that going into the fire is taking it so that God can continue to use you in the area, and trusting that he's going to protect you. That's a level of faith too. Remember, we're not talking about God saying thou shalt not get a vaccine. We're talking about having the freedom, and that's another part that I want to talk about. Having the freedom to make
a choice.
your choice. At what point does the government get to override our freedom to choose what gets injected into our bodies? Are we at a level where it is so detrimental to all of society that they have to force people to get this vaccine? Someone was telling me, like, oh, we're not going to force anybody to get vaccines, but you can't work here if you don't get it. I'm like,
you can't fly on a plane. I mean,
you can't fly on a plane. I'm like,
I'm pretty sure by 2022, the vaccine passport, I have no expertise or no one in my ear telling me that. It's just a feeling.
yeah,
You're going to have a passport. Kids are
Yeah.
going to have to be vaccinated before they go back to school. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of, and that's something, it would be a different decision if it was like, Anna, you can't buy or sell goods, or Anna, you can't do things that you like to do because you don't have this vaccine.
right.
That's a different a different intent behind me getting it, because I had a ton of people are like, I just want to be able to travel again. I don't care. I'm getting it.
Yeah. But that's part of the conditioning.
Yes.
And see, when you look at the Bible and it starts talking about receiving a mark that you will not be able to buy or sell or do business. I'm not saying that the vaccine is the mark, but it is part of the conditioning
Yes.
to where we will just accept that when it comes.
Yes.
So when I look at that, and I want to go back to something that you said earlier that was really important in regards to your son and getting the HPV. You said, why would I have him get this when it's so preventable?
Yeah.
When we're looking at COVID and we're looking at the people who are passing from this, there's a lot of things that we can do to prevent that.
Yes.
I mean, obviously you're healthy, you take care of yourself, and you haven't got it at all. And certainly if you did, you're not at very high. I mean, you're
would
at
be an
no
outlier.
risk.
I'd be way far over here on
Yeah.
the whisker box plot graph.
There's no chance.
Yeah.
And even if we take it into a little bit different, I've said this before on the show. I work with the homeless community quite a bit, and I have a lot of friends that are on the street, and I talk to them about this. And one of my friends, I was like, hey, what's going on with COVID on the street?
It wasn't there.
And he said, nobody's got COVID out here. The homeless, and as a matter of fact, when they started moving them into the hotels, that's when they started getting it.
Yeah.
Nobody on the street had COVID. Why? Because they're exercising, because they walk everywhere. They're not overeating most of the time. They're exposed to the different bacteria and flora that's out there, so their immune systems
Very
are stronger, and they're not getting COVID. And if they are, they're recovering, and it's basically, essentially, a flu to them because their bodies are strong enough to handle it. They're out in the sun. They're getting plenty of vitamin D. So when I look at it, I'm disturbed because there's not much talk about just being healthy. I mean, God has made our bodies super amazing, and we are able to handle so much. But people have talked, well, it's hit America so strong. Well, that's because
Standard American diet, the sad diet.
We have the most outrageous obesity rates for a developed nation, and no one wants to address that.
And that's really where I think that the conversation should be focused, less around whether we should or shouldn't get vaccines, but what are the other things that we can be doing to prevent this from being a problem for us?
Absolutely.
And I fully understand the difficulty in addiction to the foods that we're eating, and a lot of just the mental and emotional, how all that plays into taking care of your body appropriately, eating healthy. I do fully understand that. However, truthfully, I truthfully believe that McDonald's hamburger that you're pounding down is much more harmful than this vaccine could likely ever be to your body. We do things every single day. We put known carcinogens in our body.
Yeah.
Every single day we do things that put us at risk that we know, but they're things that we enjoy. No one likes getting a shot.
But it's a risk.
But everyone is like, I'm willing. We all know those, they're not like whistleblower documentaries about the dairy industry or about like in the 80s when the low fat craze came out and how they just added all of the sugar instead to things.
Well, now I think there is. No, they got a documentary about everything.
I know, but all of that is true. Like that's all true. And yet we still allow it. And we still personally, individually take in all of those things that are proven to be bad for us.
We know it's going to cause heart disease.
Yes.
We know it's going to cause diabetes. We know it's going to cause these things that are making us more susceptible to COVID, but we do that.
And we don't, as a medical community, we're not discussing that because, I mean, to be honest, because it's not okay anymore, because we can't shame people for, body habitus or you don't want to make people feel bad. And I understand that too. You're not
going to make them feel bad, but they're going to be dead. I mean, Cosmopolitan, I was going to do a bridge on this. Cosmopolitan, did you see that? They came out with a spread that said, "This is healthy." And it was these morbidly obese women in all these poses, and they were saying, "This is healthy." Now, I could understand if they said this is beautiful. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and God made everyone beautiful. But to say that that's healthy is an outright lie.
Yes.
Morbid obesity is probably the number one cause of all different types of death because it leads to heart disease, it leads to diabetes, it leads to all these things.
They've discovered it's really the number one indicator of poor outcomes for COVID. Aside from diabetes, aside from
because being obese leads to all of those things. So it is the root cause. So we're not having conversations about proper diet. We're not having conversations about proper exercise. And again, it goes back to that trusting the mindset of these people who are pushing it. The same people that are pushing you to get a vaccine, same people that are pushing, to everybody's got to be on lockdown. You got to have your masks on, otherwise you're the worst person in the world. They're also the same people that are saying when you're obese, it's healthy. And they're saying this so that people don't feel bad about themselves. But nothing feels worse than dying, I would imagine. So why are we advocating for these things? And it just kind of goes back to the why we don't trust what they're saying. And it's such a difficult.
We've been conditioned by medicine to take a pill.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you guys how any nurse out there knows. I will ask a patient, what kinds of medical problems do you have? Like, what kinds of things do you see a doctor for regularly that they're monitoring you for? And they'll be like, nothing. And then I say, okay, what medications do you take every day? And they have a long list of medications. Well, but I don't have high blood pressure because I take a pill for that.
Yeah.
I take 2 or 3 pills for that. I don't have X problem because I take a pill for that. So my diabetes is under control. Or I just take insulin for that because when I eat whatever I want, then I just take insulin and it fixes it. So
Right.
I don't really have a problem. But we've really been conditioned to that by doctors and doctors are not bad. Please don't take me saying that. But we've been conditioned by the medical community to just take a pill for that. And that has probably been one of the worst things. I get patients all the time that come in for gastritis, like vomiting and abdominal pain from acid in the stomach, and then the stomach gets all irritated and it's like, people, that is your like I don't want to say evolutionary response, but your like adaptive response to your body going, don't eat that anymore.
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
eat that food anymore. But instead, what do? We take antacids.
Yeah.
Well, antacids, long antacid use, they're finding now is really detrimental for digestion because you're decreasing the natural acid in your stomach. Fish oil capsules. I started taking some fancy schmancy gummy vitamins from Costco because I was like, oh, these are cute. Maybe I need some vitamins. I don't know. I take them sporadically because they're like 45 calories. There's like 6 grams of sugar in like the vitamins. It's like, gosh. I'd rather eat like 14 M&Ms.
Right.
But I was getting this heartburn periodically. I was like, gosh, what is that? I never have heartburn. And I realized it's the fish oil. So I look it up, right? Yeah, fish oil supplements can cause pretty bad heartburn. So then it's like, well, what do you do about that? Well, you just take an antacid. It's like, no. Well, why do I need the fish oil again? Well, they say it's good for your like cholesterol and your heart. Well, so is diet and exercise.
Right, exactly.
So we're being given, like, we call it polypharmacy, that especially like older people, they have so many medications that they're taking.
Yeah.
I was discussing this issue with someone that older people, the elderly, tend to not have any dental insurance. Why don't you have dental insurance? If you don't have good teeth, you cannot eat healthy food.
Right.
Why is that okay?
Not to mention all the other health-related things that come along with not having proper dental
dentition, care. Yeah. So it's just and
it all goes back to our immune system can be strong enough to beat COVID. Again, this is not
beat many diseases.
Ebola, but we have to be disciplined, and that's what it comes down to is being disciplined. And as a pastor, my goal tonight was not to say on here, okay, you should take it or you shouldn't take it. I know it's a little bit of clickbait with the title of it and everything, but gotcha. But that's not my role. My role is not to tell you whether you should or shouldn't. It's to give you permission to make a decision on your own, despite the pressures that you're getting from either side. We have to be able to decide for ourselves, but we also have to be able to look at our lives and say, hey, I need to have the discipline in order to take care of myself the way God has instructed us in the Bible. As a pastor, I can't tell you to take it. One of the things that's going on right now is, there's this kind of virtue signaling going on where it's like, I'm going to love my neighbor by getting the vaccine. It is. It's propaganda, and the church is buying into it.
Afraid of
I'm not afraid to call people out on this. You got TD Jakes saying that all the churches should open up so they can be COVID vaccine centers.
All the churches should open up for other reasons to the community.
We should open up
prior to. I don't know if TD Jakes would open his church up to the homeless.
I know. Open it up so they're not,
So they're not sleeping in the streets when it's freezing cold.
Thank you. But we're going to open it up for COVID. That's irresponsible because, the medical field doesn't even know what the results of this are. There's no way they can know the long-term impact. So for me as a pastor to go on and tell people to do it or not to do it is really not my place. It's merely to examine the data that we have, compare that to the Word of God, and say, okay, get on your face and make a decision. One of the things that I loved about your response to what are the things that help you make a decision, it wasn't data and information. It was, this is what's going on in my family, and this is what my husband and I are praying about, and this is what we decided.
Yep.
That's what it comes down to. What is the Lord telling you? What is he instructing to you to do? What are you doing with the information that God has given you? Let's not build camps and say, I'm for this, and anyone who's against me is evil. You don't know that.
Yeah,
Anna wears masks.
Would you stop a prison ministry? If you were in a prison ministry and you are the one going into the prison and you're seeing souls saved, prisoners saved, and they tell you have to have a vaccine to continue your ministry, are you going to give that up just because on a principle?
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't. Maybe God does want you to do that. I don't know.
But maybe he tells you to take the vaccine because he wants you to do it, and he's going to protect you. God is sovereign. This is why we have to have these conversations. Again, this is not something that's written in stone. There's a lot of evidence for me. My family, we will not be taking the vaccine. I don't trust it. I do not trust the government for all the reasons that Anna stated and we talked about tonight. I'm not going to advise anyone else to do it either. That's just me and my decision. You make your decision. And I'm not trying to be loosey-goosey and indecisive or play it safe. You guys know me. I don't play it safe. But I only stand strong on things that the Word stands strong on. There's nothing that's written in the Word about this. So you're not loving your neighbor or the people around you by not getting the vaccine.
No.
You need to listen to the Lord. You don't need to be pressured. You don't need to be put into this place where you're bad. It's kind of like all white people are being made to feel bad because if you're white, you're automatically a racist. Well, if you don't get a vaccine, you're automatically killing people.
I am anti-racist.
You know what? I'm gonna get a blood test for that too because apparently I'm a white supremacist to some people. Go figure.
That's so hard.
So listen, I want to take some questions here. We got some that are coming in.
I'm nervous. Be nice.
No, we've got great people here. So here we go. Is asymptomatic really a thing? Is there anyone known who is asymptomatic? Someone told me it was through getting tested, but that cannot even confirm if they are for certain. It seems more like a fear-mongering tactic to make everyone think everyone is sick.
No, it is true that people are asymptomatic. Yeah. So I had a family member through marriage who passed away from COVID, an older family member, early on in the epidemic, and his wife had absolutely no symptoms but was also positive. So the testing that they're doing, the PCR testing, the difference, so the asymptomatic, what we don't do well in America, which I don't know if they necessarily do it well in other countries either, we have sort of it's a quantitative test. There's two types of data. You have quantitative data, which is giving you actual numbers on quantity, and then qualitative. So that's more like yes or no. So I guess I should say we have qualitative testing. They do polymerase chain reaction tests where they cycle the sample over and over and over again, sometimes 27 cycles, sometimes 32 cycles, where they're constantly amplifying any DNA that is inside of the booger that we swiped out of your nose. And so if you test positive on the first cycle, you obviously have a super high viral load. So you're either super sick or you're super contagious.
Yeah.
If the cycle turns out positive on the 37th cycle, your viral load is super, super low and you're probably not giving it to anybody. So that's where the asymptomatic testing comes in. It's not false positives. It's just that the people are likely, the viral load is so low, but we've amplified it so so many times over and over again that you're testing positive even though you likely have no symptoms and are probably not contagious.
Wow. Thanks for explaining that. I had no idea what any of that stuff meant. And you're hearing all these people, well, they got false positives and all these things. This is why information is so important, people.
Yeah, and it's not positive to test influenza. It's, in my opinion, you will not test positive falsely for COVID if you have influenza, because it's literally looking for DNA in the polymerase chain reaction testing.
Yeah.
And those are the good ones. The antigen testing is kind of a waste of money. You're only going to show up positive in the antigen testing, which is the rapid test usually.
Yeah.
If you have, if you're very symptomatic and within like the first 5 days, I believe, of onset.
Okay. Wow. That's good information.
And it's expensive. Don't do it.
Says, having had the COVID-19 virus, shouldn't that be the same as having the vaccine?
So they say no, because people who had active infection, sometimes up like even this 3 months later, they tested positive for COVID. They had all the symptoms. They could have been very ill. Sometimes even 3 months later, they have no evidence of antibodies in their system. So that's that's one of the things that they don't know. So, right, like with the flu, why do we have to keep getting flu shots over and over? Part of it is because it mutates. Part of it is because for whatever reason, our bodies are not maintaining active, we call them titers of antibodies in our system. So that is why I suppose you could attempt to go get tested for antibodies, but they, similar to the virus, they don't have enough data. They don't know how long those antibodies would remain in your system.
Right.
So I'm not saying you should go get the vaccine. I'm just saying, no, it's not the same.
Okay. Now, speaking of remaining in the system.
And they do have double reinfections.
Okay.
Yeah.
So people are still getting, just like you get the flu again, you're getting this again.
Yeah.
So staying in your system, when your body is constantly producing this spike protein, is that an ongoing thing? So for the rest of your life, you're producing this spike protein?
I don't believe so, but I don't know the data behind that. Like medically, I don't
think
see
they
how
have
it's,
any
yeah,
data.
I don't see really medically how it's possible that it could stay. They say that like for sure, like the mRNA degrades, you create the spike protein. I honestly don't see scientifically how it's possible that the spike protein would last in your system
Because
forever.
once the mRNA is gone, then it's not sending the message to produce it anymore.
Well, and technically, if you have the spike protein and then you make a bunch of antibodies against it, then it would
wipe it out.
cancel it out.
And
That's my scientific perspective on it.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, another question.
Oh no. This says you're good for 4 months in regards to the vaccine. Good for 4 months. I don't remember what you were talking about that.
I don't know.
I'm not exactly
I'm so
clear
sorry.
on that.
Maybe
Sorry.
clarify.
Yeah, send a clarifying question on that one. It says, this person says, I have a son who was vaxxed and has autism due to the MMR. So big no on vaccines. Go plant strong. Amen. Taking care of yourself is the best way. You know, and that's one of the things that we have to talk about.
I think that's what God would say too, right?
Yeah.
Like that's really, when you look at like Christianity, our Christianity is not, it does not involve like our relationship with the Lord does not involve others. Like you'll see the fruit of that relationship flow into others, but ultimately my responsibility is, and my life is between me and God. I don't have to stand up to God I have to stand up for decisions I make that affect people.
Right.
But it's our responsibility as individuals to maintain our own health.
Amen.
Like to maintain your body, and to do your best to be fighting ready for anything. It's the same as like if the end was upon us and the mark of the beast was here, if you weren't prepared spiritually, you're going to fail miserably.
Yeah.
It's the same point.
Yes, absolutely. We have to be personally responsible. It's no one else's fault or responsibility to keep me well. It's me. So again, this is where our ability to have a choice comes in. And again, that's my biggest resistance to much of what's been going on is I don't see and again, this is just number based. I don't see the a recovery rate that would mandate the level of
Yeah.
extreme things that have happened in order to try and control this. It seems a little bit too much when we have so many people recovering. At the beginning, I was like, yeah, please, we don't know what we're dealing with. But once the numbers start coming out and there's some interesting things that are happening, again, you just don't trust it. And again, these are the same people who are pushing these vaccines are the same ones that are also now trying to tell our children that they can change their gender without asking us our permission, which is a whole other topic we'll be talking about in the next couple of weeks. Does the swab that goes into your nose touch your brain?
No, you have lots of bones there. There's lots of bony stopping. If you have to get a swab, I would be happy to do it for you. I've been told I'm very gentle. It's not as bad as they thought. But no, it doesn't. It sure feels like it. But we actually put in NG tubes, like when people have bowel obstructions and their intestines aren't pushing stuff through. We actually have to put these really long plastic tubes in your nose.
Oh, wow.
And they go all the way back and they hit that lovely bone and they have absolutely no chance of going into your brain. Though I think there was like one time when in nursing school, we learned about the one time when someone had a brain fracture or a skull fracture and the tube went up in there. But like,
oh, wow.
And the tube's really big. It's very uncomfortable. Do not suggest it.
I laugh, but people have told me that it feels like they're so far up there that
I've done it to
myself.
Yeah, I've done it to myself because it's actually the same swabs we do for influenza year after year after year and RSV for kids. So I thought, why are all these people making such a big deal out of this? What babies? Yeah. And then I did it to myself and I was like, oh, that's really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Not
no, it burns.
Sorry.
It does not feel good.
Says what about the part of the vaccine process or ingredient that is extracted from old abortions?
So that is not something that's in question with Moderna or Pfizer.
Yeah, that's
that is in question with the Johnson & Johnson.
Yeah.
So this is something that it's complicated. It's difficult to understand for even myself. The immortal life of Henrietta Lacks, like that concept that she had these cells that live on forever. They have these cell lines that when I think they started in Norway with some aborted fetuses, and it was the aborted fetuses were from babies that had, I can't remember what disease it was. And they found, I don't know what type of cell, your body has a bajillion cells. I don't know what type of cell they were, but they found that these cells grew in culture and replicated and replicated and replicated and essentially lived on in forever and ever and ever. And they were very good at growing what they needed to grow for vaccines. So they will use like the Novavax vaccine is grown in a moth cell. From a moth, from some SF9 moth.
Wow.
So there's insect cell cultures, but they do have to use in most of medicine human tissue or insect tissue or animal tissue to grow things. So that is true about Johnson & Johnson, though it's not like they took a baby from your local Planned. Please. Again, I'm not making light of this. They didn't take something from your local Planned Parenthood or someone who recently had an abortion and take those cells and start growing the thing in it. It is from aborted fetuses, but it's from these immortal cell lines that were started long ago and have had billions of generations of replication between the human cell or the original aborted cell and now. Not saying that it's any better, but it is true, just not necessarily in the way that some media wants to present it.
Yeah.
But it is true.
Yeah. Either way, that's just weird.
It's weird.
To me. I mean, I understand the science behind it and why it's necessary to grow these cultures within something like that, but I mean, the fact that it's coming from an aborted child is
difficult to stomach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. says, being that we've been around a lot of people, neighbors and family members, that many of them have been around their family members and have been in quarantine various times. Is it that is hold on. Is it that could we have a high immune system, and with prayer and especially the change of our eating habits, the reason we've not caught it?
I think
especially being around a lot of
absolutely.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. One of my reasonings with the homeless community, outside of the fact that all of the things that Jesse brought up, is maybe God just spared them. I mean, have they not been through enough?
Yeah.
You know? So do I think I'm definitely not, I have a hard time with prayer and healing, and because I see so many people that have prayed for healing and didn't receive it
Yeah.
in the way that they were praying for.
Yeah.
But I know that at the start of COVID, my mom and I read something somewhere because it was close to Passover. So we anointed our door, and we put a big red scarf, like the blood of
Yes.
the lamb, over our door, and we put the verses from Exodus up in homeschool page protectors. I should have laminated them, and it would have been even more homeschool. And we prayed that we were like, nope, no COVID's coming in here. We anointed
Amen.
our door. It's going to pass over. And we
Amen.
prayed constantly. And I think, yeah, that worked. So
Yeah.
I do believe a strong immune system. And I mean, I was in some rooms with patients where we were intubating and all kinds of craziness was going on. And I'm oftentimes, especially at the beginning, you would go in and you'd be like, do I have everything on I'm supposed to have? And your heart would just go drop, like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I don't have my N95. I just have a paper mask on. Or I forgot my goggles.
Yeah.
And I don't really think that that's how COVID was spreading. Really, I mean, I do
Yeah.
think it, like, especially in New York and Italy, it was before they knew they needed PPE.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Yes. Amen.
Sorry, short answer.
I'll tell you, strengthening your immune system is the best defense to any disease. Just taking care of yourself and doing what God is
And you don't need
called
to
us
buy
do.
lots of herbs online.
Yeah.
You don't have to buy, like, you really don't even need, I mean, you don't really necessarily need probiotics if you
Yeah.
eat a nice variety of plants.
Yeah. It's really just eating the way God tells us to in the Bible. You know, when we take care of our bodies, when we exercise, when we rest, when you take a Sabbath and rest.
Yeah.
Everybody's watching this is like, oh yeah, practice what you preach. I know. I'm working on it. I'm working on it. If you guys serve in church, it'll help.
Or if you're a mom, you know it's impossible.
Yes. So, but taking care of your body, that is the best defense to any sickness or disease. It says, regarding the HPV, Robert Kennedy Jr. has filed a lawsuit against the manufacturer. Because of the different side effects and things that that they're noticing that are now beyond coincidence. So with that, I don't have any hard data on that. I don't know if you can speak to any of that.
I don't really know. I just was like, yeah, I'm just not going to enable my child, at least at this
Yeah.
point. Like, I as a parent, I've realized that I never say always or never, because I don't know what will change between now and the time I have to make the decision.
Yeah.
But as for now, I was just like, that just seems like I'm telling you that it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's enabling.
Yeah.
And that's big in our culture these days, is
Yes.
enabling ourselves to fall into sin. But I think in that case, let's let the court system and the lawsuit do its
Absolutely.
job, and that forces due diligence. It forces data to come forward. So we'll see what happens. Again, you got to be real careful with just injecting your body with things. And again, not everybody in science is evil. They're not trying to kill everybody, but we do know that there are powers and principalities and spiritual hosts of wickedness, rulers of the darkness of this age, that will use any and everything in order to try and bring about the enemy's plan. So we thank God for people who are bold enough to challenge.
I know a lot of people that are very anti-vaccine, but they get lots of Botox. I'm always like, that's a little, doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, I guess, you pick and choose, but
Again, you're picking and choosing. I mean, you're injecting
Okay.
stuff into your body.
Okay.
And again, I think the biggest thing is that it's beginning to be forced.
Oh, yeah.
If
yeah.
not,
Yes.
if not legally, socially,
Yeah.
it is
Agreed.
being forced. Based on your fiery furnace comment, are you willing to take the vaccine if the data starts to reflect that people get an autoimmune response once they encounter other coronaviruses? So this is something that I meant to ask. The cytokine storm. What is that? And because it's related to this question, so I want to kind of answer that and then go back to the heart of it.
What I think it's referring to, the autoimmune condition. I couldn't really find much about that online, but the concern typically with vaccines and new vaccines is something called antibody dependent enhancement, which is like that RSV vaccine. They found when vaccines create suboptimal antibodies or a suboptimal response, it actually makes you more susceptible. It makes it easier for the virus to get in and take over and do its job or do its damage. That is, I would assume, would be something with these vaccines that we would have seen by now, particularly because it would happen in a vast majority of people.
Yeah.
The cytokine storm is like, it's not anything new to COVID. It's not something that any infection produces a cytokines. They're a cell signaler. So when a foreign substance like a bacteria, some sort of infectious agent enters your body, the cytokines are like, I think it's neutrophils, some white blood cells send out cytokines like, hey, let's recruit. We need help. So what cytokines do is they create this cascade of things that are good. So they make your blood vessels kind of leaky because you need to be able to everything that's in your blood, your white blood cells, all of the things that the antibodies, all the stuff that fight infection, need to be able to readily get into your cells to fight. They don't want to stay in your blood because that doesn't do any good. So inside your blood vessels.
Right.
So cytokines make your blood vessels leaky. Among other things, they create inflammation. Inflammation is basically like leaky blood vessels in response to injury, tissue damage, or infection. And so the cytokine storm is what happens if you've ever heard of sepsis.
Yeah.
You can get sepsis from any infection, a urinary tract infection, let's say. And the cytokine storm is when they just can't shut off and they just keep there. Nobody is like, dude, yeah, no, we got everybody. We got this. It's when just, it's like a...
They keep on coming.
Yeah, right? Like I'm picturing right now, like when your team wins and everyone's so excited and all the stands empty.
Right.
Right? No one's like going, whoa, hold on. We got enough here. So the cytokine storm, it was what was responsible with COVID for all of the severe infections. They were like, why is everyone having this storm? Because typically, like a urinary tract infection or a pneumonia, that you don't have everyone presenting in this severely septic state. So I did see that there's concerns that the vaccine could create a cytokine storm. I don't see how it could do it after the fact. Like, again, this is making an assumption that they're relatively sharing correct data with us about side effects from the vaccines.
Right.
Would I get it? That's another thing that I would have to ask God. I mean, would I? I tell you, I never cry. I never cry. And a couple weeks into it, I was working almost every single day, like sometimes like 14-hour days. We were staying late. I was up in the COVID ICU. Initially, I was like, oh, I'm so bad. I'm so awesome. Like, look at me. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm going to die from this. What if I die? What if I take this home to my family and they die? This was really early on. And I was like, what do I do, Lord? I did not sign up for this.
Yeah.
I thought I could do this and I can't do this. I don't want to care about other people more than I care about myself. I don't want to go there and help people. I don't.
Yeah.
And I cried, and Brandon was like, didn't know what to do. When I cry, he's always like, do you need me? Do you want me to touch you? Do you want me to hug you? I'd like to, but you generally don't like that. And then he was kind of like, I'm not sure what to do. And then God was like, you better put on your big girl underwear, Anna, and get yourself together, because this is what I have called you to do. And it reminded me of Esther. You have been called for such a time as this.
Amen.
I don't know. I mean, Esther made the decision to walk up to the king and to enter his gates, knowing very well that if you weren't invited,
you could be killed.
You could be killed on the spot. So again, that's a question, even if I knew that it was dangerous, whether or not I would.
Yeah.
I could not tell you that answer right now.
Yeah. Well, that's an excellent response. I like that. Says, are there nanoparticles in the COVID testing and vaccine? What is a nanoparticle, and is it harmful?
So what I understand a nanoparticle to be is like a really tiny thing. That's essentially what nanoparticle stands for. I think it gets a really bad rap because in this, it is in, there's a lot of talk in the vaccine, like the Novavax vaccine is like very focused on nanoparticle, but a nanoparticle is like just a really small thing from what I understand. So I don't think it's like a nanobot or like nano just really, I think means like super tiny.
Super tiny.
Yeah. So yes, there are. I don't know if there's subsets of nanoparticles. Like, is it an umbrella term? And then I'm not sciencey enough to know that. But yes, there are.
I think a lot of the concern comes from, again, being amazed at what we're able to do.
Yeah.
And then what people speculate a lot of times what they could do. Could they, in fact, put something in these vaccines that becomes a part of our body that is in there doing things other than what the vaccine.
They could, because they experiment doing that stuff all the time. Yeah,
I mean, if you've seen it in the movies, they can probably do it.
Yeah,
everything short of time travel, maybe.
No,
but
maybe.
But yeah, I mean, is it something that they can do? And that's the thing. There's not much that we can't do at this point. Even the Bible says in Genesis chapter 7.
We can make babies from 3 people.
Wait, what?
In the petri dish, you can take 3 people's DNA. Like if you're a same-sex couple and a female couple, let's say, and then they can mix your 2 DNAs with a male in order to fertilize and have a baby that has both of your DNA in it.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's like readily practiced, but you can do it. And this is not from like a finalwarning.com. This is like that's like real science. That was like a breakthrough.
When we talk about conspiracy theories and all this stuff, what is that really? When you say conspiracy theory, does that mean that you don't think that they can do it?
Yeah.
Does it mean that you think that they won't do it? Because most things they can and most things they will do. And but I say they, I mean those who are under the sway of the wicked one. The enemy knows. So just hearing that is, I'm like, what can't they do? What wouldn't they do? To advance an agenda. Again, just things to question. In your opinion, are flu shots necessary? My husband just took our son to the doctor and got shamed terribly by the doctor for not giving them permission to give our 6-month the flu shot.
Did I ever get them before I was a nurse? No. I don't know. Nobody ever asked me to get one. I was told I had to wear a mask all the time at work between certain months if I didn't get one. And I was like, oh, that seems so inconvenient. So I've gotten them. My kids get them most years. Sometimes others don't. Would I be less inclined to do that if I didn't have my parents living with us? Maybe. I do it to protect my parents. Have I held a child who died from the flu? Yes, multiple times. Have I coded? So a lot of that affects whether or not I think that they're necessary. One is too much for me.
Yeah.
So, as the idea behind flu shots and vaccinations is that you, and in the MMR and stuff like that, measles shots, is that you get herd immunity so that these things are not flying around. You know, your child gets the flu shot so that if they're 6 months old, so that they don't get severely infected with the flu and potentially have a poor outcome. You know, I get a flu shot so that I don't get the flu and spread it to a lot of vulnerable people at work. They want the community to get a flu shot so that you don't have runny, you know, your kid doesn't have a snotty nose and they're sitting in the basket at Trader Joe's and wiping all their snot on the basket. And then Granny comes behind and takes that basket next and puts her hands on it and sneezes or wipes her face, and then she doesn't get the flu and have a poor outcome. So that's the reasoning behind why we want everyone, the medical community wants everyone to get a flu shot.
Okay. So, but if you get a flu shot, it doesn't guarantee that you're not going to get the flu.
No.
And then even if you get the flu shot and you don't have symptoms of the flu, it doesn't mean that you can't still spread it.
You're likely much less contagious. I do
Okay.
believe studies have shown that the viral load is much lower in patients that got the flu shot and then still got the flu.
Okay, so
But we've
so
had
it's-
the flu shot for decades.
and
It's a
we're still
lot
getting
of
the flu.
There's a lot of data behind it. The flu
Yeah.
is a wily little, it's a
Yeah.
wily one. Like HIV. HIV is a very smart little wily virus, which is why it's been really hard to come up with an HIV vaccine because it hides.
Wow.
And yeah, so it's
It's like it has a mind of its own.
yeah.
Wow. Okay, let's see. Any more questions?
I did want to bring up one thing about like being really careful. I remember when in some of your recent sermons in the past year talking about like sensationalism
Yes.
and in messaging. So
Yes.
there's a lot of sensationalism, obviously, even just behind the push for coronavirus vaccines and things like that, right? It's sensational to say,
Yeah.
you know, I love my neighbor because I got the vaccine, insinuating that you don't love yours because you didn't get it.
Yes.
So when I was researching a little bit about the vaccines to make sure I could like not give bad information or severely false information, I came across this article about how the mRNA vaccine turns off cells that would normally suppress tumors.
Yeah.
So you're going to get the vaccine and then you're going to get cancer. And this was from, I know I mentioned it a couple times just because it was on the tip of my tongue, from a finalwarning.com.
Put it out there. Yeah.
Like, first off, I mean, don't get news from a finalwarning.com. Like, that's sensational in and of itself.
Yeah.
However, they so severely misquoted an article from Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is an institute at a cancer center. And this article was beyond, like, there was some stuff was in all caps and, you know, it's
Yeah.
like screaming at you. It was very, very, very emotional.
Yeah.
Very emotional.
I read the
language.
article. Very over the top.
So what the Memorial Sloan Kettering article said was, like I said before, mRNA is in everything, in everybody. It's in all of your cells. It's the only way that you're alive. Like, not the only way. One of the many processes that happens to make you alive. Mm-hmm. And what the study said was, typically when we're looking at cancer and we're, for certain types of cancers, you're looking at DNA. Mm-hmm. Okay, where's the mutated gene that caused this cancer? So in some cancers, like I believe CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, was the particular cancer they were referencing. They don't find DNA mutations. So they don't find genes that are bad, that are causing it. And they're like, what's the deal with this? Because for a lot of cancers and diseases, you can find them. Mm-hmm. So they said, well, you know, remember I mentioned that mRNA is like the waiter taking your order, right?
Yeah.
Well, if the waiter just writes GF and like writes like ham GF and the cook is like, oh, they want a hamburger and they're a good fellow. I couldn't think of anything else that would stand for GF, right? I might end up with a hamburger with a gluten-free bun. I mean, with a gluten-full bun.
Right.
And gluten is my kryptonite.
Yeah.
So the mRNA, they're now saying maybe the problem is when the mRNA transcribes the DNA. Remember we said mRNA cuts out what is deemed to be unessential. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what we should be looking at. That's difficult to look at because mRNA degrades quickly. But maybe that's what's causing the problem. And these proteins, DNA is a prescription for a protein. Some DNA is a prescription for tumor suppressing proteins. Maybe the problem and the reason is not because the tumor suppressing proteins are coming from faulty DNA. Maybe the problem is in the mRNA transcription, and we should be looking at that. And people are taking this as mRNA creates, you're going to get injected with mRNA from this vaccine, and it's going to tell your tumor suppressing cells not to turn on, and you're going to get cancer. And that could not be farther from the truth based on what the study they're referencing.
Right.
So you have to be very careful that you have to understand. I always say that a nurse is only as good as what she knows, that he or she knows what they don't know.
Yeah.
You have to know what you don't know. You are dangerous when you think you know everything.
Yeah.
And so when you're reading things, scientific studies, I mean, even I had to go back and refresh myself. I have like full notes here that I took on like, okay, again, let me refresh myself on this process. And I'm someone who took years and years of chemistry and anatomy and molecular biology and organic chemistry. And it's still hard for me to understand.
Yeah.
So you just that there are forces out there that want to divide and want to destroy.
Yes.
The best way to do that is to create confusion. That's what the devil does all the time.
Yes.
So you cannot, you have to be prayerful and not let, like, again, I'm going to reference like every Bridge episode and sermon you've done in the last year. Not let yourself get emotional. When we draw a conclusion, it's very easy to go finding the evidence for that conclusion versus going first and looking at all of the evidence and then drawing a conclusion from that.
That's pseudoscience. Pseudoscience goes in, you have a conclusion that you want, and then you try and find things that support that rather than just looking at the evidence and finding it, letting it lead you towards the truthful outcome. And that's where we need to be. We cannot be in this place where, okay, I think I know everything, and then we just hold on to that. No, we got to be open to learn and think beyond what we think we know. I love that. You're only as good as what you know.
What you don't know.
Yeah, that's so true. All right, family. So it looks like we got a couple more.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna take just a couple more. This is a very popular topic. It says, this isn't about the vaccines, but Anna, what is the craziest thing you've seen in the ER?
Let me think about that. Well, some of the craziest things I've seen are completely inappropriate for discussion.
Let's keep it PG.
But I can say some of the funniest things are, you have a lot of holes in your body, and people like to put things in them. And the things that people choose to put in different orifices are very interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, other like...
Sign up to be an ER nurse.
Yeah, crazy stuff. You know, one of the thing that made me fall in love with emergency medicine, and Brandon will remember this. I called him at 3 a.m. I was like, I saw they brought in this prostitute and her Johnny stabbed her 11 times, and he stabbed her right in her heart, and they cut open her chest and they cracked open her ribs, and they were massaging their heart with their hands inside the chest cavity, and the blood was just coagulated like black cherry jello, and it was amazing. And they asked me if I wanted to come do it, and I was like, yes. I'm a volunteer. Don't tell anyone at County Hospital. But and a lot of other things are really funny. Like I had a patient, the psych patients, they're funny. They're so, I know, they're naughty. And one patient this past week, I gave him a sandwich because I heard him crying about being hungry. He was literally crying to the firemen. So I was like, oh, I'll take him a sandwich really quick. And then he was like, you have to call my girlfriend. She's very famous. She lives in New York City. She's the lead on Saturday Night Live. You have to know who I'm talking about. And I was like, no. I don't watch TV, so I don't know who that is. But she knows my insurance information. She has very good insurance. She's very famous. And I was like, okay, well, that's good. I don't deal with insurance. I'm just bringing you a sandwich. No matter what I did, I could not stop this man. So he's called me some choice things, said some nasty things, and I said, well, it sounds like you'd like me to take that sandwich right back. And he looked at me and he was like, what are you talking about? I said, well, you could choose to just be grateful for the sandwich. And he goes, are you disciplining me? I said, well, call it what you'd like. I mean, I could take it back. And then he ended up going through this whole crazy thing, and he was posturing at me like he was going to punch me. And I had this wheelchair in between me and him, and I was like planning, okay, I'm going to shove the wheelchair into his knees. And then they call this code gray, and it's this big ordeal. And then he's in the wheelchair, and then he goes, ah. And then he like slowly melts down onto the floor and is like, she pushed me out of the wheelchair. Didn't you see it? The camera saw it. And
Oh my gosh.
I was like, okay.
Okay, you have to have a sense of humor to some degree to work in the ER.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Oh
and
my gosh.
yeah. So, and there's other crazy things, but like I said, they're inappropriate.
Keeping it PG. Okay, are bacterial infections deadly? And is prolonged mask wearing allowing there to be a bacterial buildup that could lead to an infection? In addition, could that make catching COVID more likely?
I suppose it's possible. For the most part, any bacteria, I would say, that's collecting inside of a mask is going to be stuff that you're already relatively immune to. Bacteria are pretty they're a little more choosy than viruses. So they need a little bit more of an in, right? So we all have like Staph aureus on our skin, but it doesn't become a problem until you get a cut. And then your immune system, for whatever reason that day, wasn't able to fight that bacteria that got into the cut. And then it multiplies and it becomes like a staph infection. So I would assume that we're relatively protected against anything that could be collecting in a mask. However, I mean, if you're wearing your mask like to Target and like Ralph's and then going home, I don't see any reason for like being concerned about that being prolonged mask wearing. I do potentially feel like this year wearing the mask, I mean, I wear it 3 to 4 days a week for 12 hours, right? But I noticed my allergies were a lot worse this year. I don't know if that means anything. I haven't gotten sick. I don't think there's any validity in believing that masks decrease your pH of your blood. There's a lot of talk about that. Like you have to die for that to happen, literally die. Like prolonged not breathing. And, surgeons and certain other, like we were discussing, other types of workers wear masks all day anyways. And there's never been any discussion that that's harmful for them. So
have we seen any data on bacterial infections?
No, I don't think anyone is not. I mean, there might be out there, but nothing that I've seen or heard.
Yeah. Now,
I don't think it's implausible.
Right. But that kind of brings up another point. If your mask is it's allowing you to breathe, then I mean you're able to get your oxygen in and out, and everything's fine. You're breathing. Yeah. So at the same time, if it's not preventing you from breathing properly, how much is it really preventing the virus from coming
Well, that's
through?
The question, right? Like, where are people being infected? Like, as a healthcare worker in New York City, in the very beginning of this, you had no mask on and people are coughing and sneezing in your face, like throwing high viral load, large amounts of like saliva and particles, and infecting you. Had those people had their masks on, potentially the viral load that they did get wouldn't have been enough to infect them with anything. Right. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle there where it's no, they're not 100% protective. Is a mask really protecting you from the next person at the store? I mean, probably not while you're like passing them in the popcorn aisle, but maybe if the cashier is super sick and sneezes while you're standing there at checkout, potentially, it is. But this all
it's
or nothing.
the large droplets that's
Yes.
it's capturing.
And a high viral load of the person, like how much virus are they actually expressing in their like mucus and stuff.
So explain that to me, because from what I understood, it only takes one little virus
It does.
to latch on
Potentially.
and then get this motor running. So does the viral load just mean the amount of virus that's there and the potential, it increases the chances of one of those viruses getting through?
Yeah, essentially viral load is like if you take a sample from my nose, it's density.
Yeah.
So density of viral particles to a certain volume of space, if it's the best way I can think of describing it.
So if you have low viral load, you're not even infected really, but you can technically still have the virus on you. It just hasn't latched onto anything.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what. Well, no, if you test positive, you have it in your system, it's replicating, but for whatever reason, it's not replicating at a very high rate, and there's not much of it if you're asymptomatic or you have a low viral load. So, that's kind of hard too when like the medical community isn't great about putting out definitions. Like what does that really mean? You know, like it's so that's really hard. You have to do you have to spend a lot of time researching what the meanings are of all of the definitions. And how that really affects you.
No, that's good.
And essentially, people that have a high viral load are going to be the people that have a ton of symptoms.
Okay.
So.
Oh, because it's replicated so much. All right.
Yeah. So that's the thing about ivermectin. You wanted to ask me about that.
Yes, ivermectin.
So ivermectin is shown in cell culture. So in the lab, it's been shown to greatly decrease viral load in samples, right? And then there's some studies. Some of the studies have really poor sample sizes, like 24 people. Others have better sample sizes. I didn't see any studies from the U.S. necessarily. Most of them seem to be like in Brazil and
Argentina.
Other countries.
There was an observational one that was in France or something like that.
Yeah, and so it doesn't look like it like cures COVID, and I couldn't find any information on the pathophysiology behind why it would help COVID, but it potentially decreases the viral load enough that like you're only contagious for like maybe 7 days versus this like 2-week quarantine period and all of that. That's what I saw the most, the heaviest data on was that it's decreasing that viral load. So also if you can do that, but it was also given to people that weren't very sick.
Right.
So that's another like hard thing that a lot of promise in some of these medications is they're testing them on people that aren't very sick with COVID. So we don't know what they would do. And then it doesn't help when you have people advocating for ivermectin that are saying, why there's no reason that we should do random controlled trials for this medication, because how could I give a placebo to a patient that I know is sick? That's just poor ethics. And how could I? And it's like, well, but no, that's science.
Yeah, that's what you have to do to see if this actually works.
And like you always say, you have to have boundaries and discipline. Like you can't pick and choose in medicine what you choose to follow and what you don't, because people's lives depend on it.
Yeah.
That's why they're not giving ivermectin. Likely, I don't think it's because it's cheap. I think it's more likely like that we don't have enough, we don't have enough data. We'll give you this vaccine. We don't have enough data, but
see, and that's the point I was about to bring up. Is like we've got more data and trial tests for ivermectin than we do for this, vaccine that they're pumping to millions of people. So my thing is like with ivermectin, I mean, and these aren't quacks who are promoting this for the most part. I mean, Dr. Corey, who initially testified before Congress about its effectiveness and cited the studies in Argentina, one that was a large-scale one done with medical workers who were exposed to it all the time.
Yeah,
I think it was a total of 1,200 to 1,500 medical workers. There was also one that was an observational study. An observational study just means that they didn't plan on doing it. They just noticed that this was kind of how it happened, but there was a nursing home. Average age of the patients there was 90, and they had an outbreak of scabies, so everybody was on ivermectin. Well, the workers got COVID. This was early on, and all the workers came there with COVID, and people got sick with COVID but they had 0 deaths and only one person was on a ventilator, and they recovered. And they're like, wait a minute, these are 90-year-olds on average who almost all of them got COVID, and none of them died. Why was that? Well, the control there was that they were all on ivermectin. So there's some compelling research, at least enough research to do some real trials and studies. If you're not going to go off and say, let's not do trials and studies on this in order to do it. So that's
we
that's
shoot
the thing.
ourselves in the foot a lot of the times.
Yeah.
And saying, and well, it couldn't be that simple. I think that might be part of the issue with the medical community sometimes too, is like there's no way that it could be that simple.
Yeah.
And there's no way that it could come from that source. That's a really hard sort of bias to get over.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean doctors do
deworming
it.
medication all
Right?
of a sudden cures COVID.
And doctors do it to
that
us
doesn't
all
make
the
sense.
time when I'm like, are you sure you want to do that for that patient? And some doctors are like, who are you to talk to me? And then they'll do the opposite, and it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Other doctors are like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
So, sometimes the source of the information is, unfortunately, they get very judgmental and they don't want to listen.
Yeah. And that's unfortunate. We got to let truth be truth regardless of the source.
Yeah.
Sometimes, that's why we have to seek truth. Well, family,
Okay.
we have gone over, but you know what? It was necessary. This is a big issue. This is something that we have to talk about. We have to consider, not just from a physical standpoint, but from an ethical standpoint, from a biblical standpoint. And I just want to say thank you so much for being on. You were the perfect combination of word and science.
Thank you.
And it was I think it was everything that we needed to hear. So
Well, thank you. It's been on my heart, so I'm glad to be able to share it.
Well, I'm super glad, and love to have you come back on as things develop and more information comes
Or any
becomes
health
available.
stuff, sometimes I get a little, I can be a little blunt, which is hard to take for some people.
Well, we're not used to that on the bridge here.
but
We don't take kindly to bluntness. But again, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Jesse.
Family, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. I pray that this blessed you. If this blessed you, then it probably blessed someone else. So I invite you to share this with everyone. Click the like button, share it to everybody. Look, this isn't monetized. We don't do this for money. We do it because we love God, we love people, and we want to see the truth brought to the world. So family, we love you. God bless you. And until we see you next time, keep it bold, keep it balanced,
And keep it biblical.
Thank you. Have a good night, you guys. Love you.
Thank you. Good night.
Oh, wait. Now it's good night.
Good night.